Kafirs need to understand the trilogy, the political nature of Islam, and how Islam regards Kafirs. Other religions, in fact all the other major religions, have a form of the golden rule, which in Christianity is do unto others as you should have them do unto you. Islam doesn't have a golden rule. Instead it has a dualism. One set of rules for Muslims and another set of rules applying to Kafirs, in other words Australian society. The bottom line is you treat non-Muslims differently from the way you treat Muslims. Australia's Muslim population has been growing strongly. It was up 69% in the 10 years to census 2011. The issue, though, is not just growth of population, but the fact that the Muslim leadership wants integration but never assimilation. Muslims are imposing more and more aspects of Sharia in the West, which are white-anting our way of life and our freedoms. For starters, restrictions on freedom of speech and no-go areas in much of Europe. One of the most visible forms of imposing Sharia is halal food in the mass market and halal certification applied to foods in the mass market. Jews, of course, don't try and impose kosher upon everybody. Muslims do and try and impose halal upon everybody. Now, the Australian Meat Industry Council said 2 years ago that 100% of goat meat was halal slaughtered, 85% of lamb, 65% of chicken, and well over half of the beef, and those figures are undoubtedly higher now. In New Zealand, Muslims are only 1% of the prisoners in jails, but all prisoners eat halal meat. As early as 2007, all prisoners in Walston Corrections Centre in Brisbane were eating only halal meat. Qantas has removed pork from its in-flight menus on flights to and from Europe as a result of its partnership with Emirates. And all meals are now prepared without alcohol. Now, why remove beef, or why not remove beef too, out of respect for Hindus and Sikhs? Why only respect Islam? Another, I think, quite astonishing thing is the number of special concessions that Islam is getting at public expense in Australia. I haven't noticed a chapel at Brisbane Airport, but there's a Muslim prayer room. Who do you think paid for it? Likewise, the Australian Football League, the AFL, caved in to demands for prayer rooms at all of its venues, at its own, not Muslim expense. Jeff Kennett, the former Premier of Victoria, opposed it but was overruled by political correctness, a fear of offending Muslims. Darebin Council in northern Melbourne employed a Muslim outreach officer to educate the community about Islam. How so? The Federal Attorney General in the previous Labor government gave close on $100,000 to the council under the Program for Countering Violent Extremism. But the council used this to employ someone to make the community's attitudes more receptive toward Islam. This is government funding for dawah, Islamic proselytizing. Under the multiculturalism gravy train, the last federal government subsidised the Islamic Museum of Melbourne to over $1 million. But there's no sign yet of government funding for a Hindu museum, a Buddhist one, a Sikh one, a Christian one, a Confucian one, or a Baha'i one, or for that matter, a Jewish museum. Muhammad's successes and failures have been studied by Muslims for nearly 1400 years to provide authoritative strategies and tactics to advance their so-called civilization and to Islamize and destroy all other civilizations. Muhammad wasn't kidding when he said, "War is deceit." Islam uses deceit to advance and destroy all other civilizations. The fundamental ethic of Islam is that the end, in other words, the advancement of Islam, justifies the means. That is, in fact, the ethic of all totalitarian systems. In a country like Australia, official Muslim spokesmen will rarely tell you that relations between them and Kafirs can never be fair or equal. Islam even has a doctrine of permissible and obligatory lying. The main form is taqiyya, deliberate deception. A classic tactic is to quote a mild verse of the Quran in full knowledge that it's been abrogated, in other words overturned, by a later, much more violent one. For example, 2:256 in the Quran, "There's no compulsion in religion," is overturned almost immediately later by surahs which talk about conversion by compulsion, or for that matter by absolute violence. Because of the two contrasting dimensions to Muhammad's life, that is, his period in Mecca and his period in Medina, Islamic apologists can always find support in the Prophet's example. This allows a having it both ways strategy. A Muslim can tell the Kafir the truth, or he can tell him a lie, depending on what will advance Islam. And there are other more creative forms of sacred lying. Kithman is telling a deliberately misleading half-truth, like saying, "I hate Hitler," when the real meaning is, "I hate Hitler because he didn't kill all the Jews." And there's maruna, which means using flexibility to blend in with the enemy or the surroundings so as not to appear Muslim. For example, the 9/11 hijackers visited strip clubs and bars during their off times while taking classes in the US to fly planes into the World Trade Center, the Pentagon and the White House. And many Americans believe that Hillary Clinton's aide, Huma Abedin, married Jewish Congressman Anthony Weiner, at least in part to burnish her security credentials so that she could infiltrate the highest levels of the US administration. So, what impact will Islam's assertions have on Australian civil society? I think they're dangerous for the harmony and cohesion of Australia's civil society. Integration means Muslims will slip into the Australian societal fabric, but never assimilation means Muslims will ceaselessly maintain the Islamic codes and practices which deliberately segregate them from the rest of humanity. Unfortunately, Muslims want Australia's benefits, but only on their terms. This means that the sovereignty and validity of Australian law and our institutions now have a home-based Islamic opposition. Muslims are going to keep advancing their rival society with its political and legal Sharia institutions under the guise of human rights and religious freedom. They're very good at using our courts and tribunals, but Islam is not very good at giving other people human rights and religious freedom. It's very good at using our laws and our institutions against us. Their ultimate goal is to force Australian society to submit to Islam.